Welcome back to the program. Time now for our political panel. Joining me from our Perth studio is Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Tudge, and from our Melbourne studio, Labor MP Kelvin Thomson. Thanks both for your time today, gents. I'd like to start talking about the terror threat, but a bit of a different aspect. A family is taking legal action, we've seen today, after claiming they were brutally and unfairly targeted during the counter-terrorism raids we saw in Sydney last week. A 15-year-old son in this family says his mother was not allowed to cover herself in the traditional Muslim way. Bed sheets were reportedly ripped off her by police. She was allegedly punched. The son says the police searched the house with sniffer dogs, metal detectors, dug up the backyard and apparently found nothing. No charges were laid and nobody was detained, and this family has not been told why they were targeted. Now, Tudge, we've had a lot of raids for, so far, not many arrests. Do you think this is the best way to build support for what the government is calling Team Australia?
Well, good afternoon, Tom. Every individual in Australia has the right to take legal action if they choose, but I would say that I have complete and utter confidence in our security agencies. They do a tremendous job. They act within the law. They have a very difficult job and often putting their own lives on the line to protect our society. I have great confidence in them, but as I said, it's a free country and individuals can take legal action should they choose.
Obviously, it's a little bit of a guess here, but people not being told why they were targeted, do you think where possible they should be told as long as there's no sort of risk to operations?
Well, the operational objective is the most important criteria here, and we always take advice from our security agencies in terms of what the government does. In this particular instance, it was the New South Wales Police Force who made decisions about what they should do on the basis of real and present threats. And I have full confidence in what they do, the communications they provide, the activities they do, the training and professionalism that they have.
Kelvin Thomson, in the future there could be a similar story to this, that the authorities declare a special intelligence operation, and if so, journalists could face jail for reporting it. These are the new terror laws. Are you comfortable with Labor having rubber-stamped that legislation?
I don't think there's any prospect, Tom, that operations of this kind would receive that kind of approach. I believe that journalists and others will continue to be free to report things that go on in the public domain, such as the raids that you're referring to. The New South Wales Police have indicated in this instance that they are prepared to investigate and act upon any complaints that are made. There's a suggestion that legal action may be undertaken, and of course that's the right of people who feel aggrieved by the actions of authorities. So not having been there, I'm not in a position to comment on the facts of this case, but we do have in place processes that ensure that if the wrong thing is done to people, that they do have courses or access to redress.
OK, well, moving on to your portfolio, Tudge, of Indigenous Affairs. You're seeking feedback, we understand, on a healthy welfare card, which could mean putting some or all of a person's welfare payment on this cashless card, meaning it can only be used for living essentials, if you like. I know you're seeking feedback, but where do you sit on this? Is this something you think will work? Are we talking 80% of the payment on the card? What do you think it would work best?
Yeah, Tom, this was a recommendation from Andrew FORREST, who we asked to provide some advice for us as to how to get more Aboriginal people into jobs. And it's a broad report that he's given us, with one of the central recommendations being this cashless debit card idea. And the key rationale for the recommendation was that there is significant alcohol and drug problems in many Indigenous communities, many mainstream communities, and this is potentially a way to curb some of those problems. Now, we've heard a lot of advice on this. I've consulted broadly across the country in relation to this idea and the other ideas, and we're yet to make a decision. Some of the things which you put forward just in that intro, yes, of course we're considering, but as we are considering other ideas that have come forward for us as well.
OK, so you're going to wait until the full result, if you like, is in. You don't have an indication, yes, an inclination on this?
Not at this stage, Tom. We don't. We've heard numerous opinions from across Australia. Some people who like the entire concept and would like the entire concept implemented tomorrow. Others who don't like it at all, and there's some who are in between.
All right.
And we're going to methodically
go
forward for this and see where this lands.
We'll see where that lands then, as you mentioned. Kelvin Thomson, also within this policy area, new laws to compensate members of the stolen generation are likely to pass the Senate in South Australia next week. This is a push from the opposition, the Liberal opposition supported by the Greens. Should Labor support this? And more broadly, should there be a view to a national scheme so it's not state by state? We've had Tasmania so far, maybe South Australia now.
Yes, I think there is a case for a national approach to this issue, although obviously the facts have varied from situation to situation, but I think it would be preferable to look at a national approach rather than have the prospect that different approaches will be applied in different states.
And you think, I know it's not your state, but South Australia would support the Greens and Liberal push there?
Well, I'm not in a position to comment on the South Australian government or parliamentary party in terms of how they are dealing with it, but it does seem to me that if the thing was dealt with at a national level, that might produce fairer outcomes.
Fair enough. Alan Tudge, would a national approach to this be a good idea in your opinion?
I'm not convinced of that, Tom, in part because it's a different history and different policies and different practices state by state in relation to the stolen generations. And so I think it is actually quite proper that each jurisdiction has to consider their own histories and their own policies and properly make a response in relation to their particular circumstances. We know, for example, that Tasmania had a slightly different approach to South Australia.
Yeah, and they've already, of course, passed similar legislation. I'd just like to move on to the budget because some very familiar lines appeared in the Australian newspaper today. We heard about global economic woes that could force the government to cut its budget outlook, lower iron ore and coal prices significantly impacting revenue. The MyEFO update will contain all of the ugly details, we're being told, but it might sound like a lot like Wayne Swan's time as Treasurer. In fact, these are the thoughts of Joe Hockey. Alan Tudge, is this the ground being readied for a budget blowout under the Liberal Party?
No, it's not, Tom. We inherited an absolute fiscal disaster from the Labor Party, and as you know, we've put forward a plan to get the budget back under control. Now, of course, as circumstances change, we'll revise the figures, but unlike the Labor Party, we have put forward very conservative assumptions and will continue to do so. Whereas the Labor Party in the past,
it looks as though even those assumptions weren't conservative enough, though. So is this the same problem?
Well, let's just wait and see, and all will be revealed in the MyEFO later this year. But the contrast is very stark, Tom, to under the Labor Party, which you mentioned, where at every single budget they put the most optimistic revenue assumptions. They then spent up to those revenue assumptions, and then of course the following year they'd sort of say, "Oh no, we didn't hit our revenue targets." But meanwhile, they've locked in the expenditure, and that's exactly one of the reasons why we're in such a fiscal mess right now. So we'll be very honest with the Australian people. We'll take conservative assumptions, and we need to get the budget back under control.
Kelvin Thomson, I'll let you respond and also just ask you, Labor obviously said revenue write-downs were outside of its control when they were in government. Is it going to be pretty hard for your party now to criticise the coalition for what could be the same thing?
Well, I just about fell off my chair when I read the story in The Australian this morning, Tom. This is absolutely breathtaking hypocrisy from the Liberal Party. Just as recently as a fortnight ago at a press conference in Canberra, I quote the Minister for Finance, Matthias Cormann, "The government of the day is responsible for the budget forecasts. Labor kept overestimating revenue and underestimating their spending, and Labor can run as far as they like. They won't be able to hide from their responsibility. We are taking responsibility and we will stand by how we perform against our forecasts." And of course you had Tony Abbott always saying there will be no lame excuses. So the government is hardly in a position now to claim that it's, the budget is outside its control and that the revenue write-downs are a consequence of forces beyond its control. I think if they want to do this in the MyEFO, they need to at the same time issue an apology to Wayne Swan for the relentless persecution they engaged in relation to his forecasts and the outcomes.
Please,
To
Kelvin.
the same end, though, if you're going to heavily criticise the government, Kelvin Thomson, do you at the same time have to criticise Wayne Swan and his estimates?
The point here is that the government has walked away from a range of revenue options which it should not have done. It's given a $1.1 billion tax break to multinational corporations. It's walked away from the carbon price. It's walked away from the mining tax. It wants to engage in a multi-billion dollar paid parental leave scheme. It has ways of helping to balance the budget. It is not using them.
Please,
Well,
Kelvin, we've put forward a plan, Tom, to get the budget back under control, and Labor has blocked every single measure, including, mind you, $5 billion of savings which they put forward, which they're still blocking.
I know this is an ongoing debate. I'm going to have to leave it there. We are right out of time. Alan Tudge and Kelvin Thomson, thanks both for your time. Thanks for watching, of course, at home, and stay with us for news.